welcome to India Tonight. I'm Shivani Gharat. Now, leading carriers represented by the Federation of Indian Airlines, including Air India, IndiGo and SpiceJet, have written to the Civil Aviation Ministry warning that soaring aviation turbine fuel prices are putting the sector under extreme stress. The airlines say the current fuel cost environment is making several routes financially unviable, and if the prices remain elevated, they may have to reassess network plans and operations. The industry has also pointed out that while government stepped in last month to prevent a deeper crisis by capping the increase in domestic ATF prices to rupees 15 per litre, ATF prices for the international operations were raised sharply by 73 rupees per litre. Now, according to airlines, this has made many international routes along with domestic operations commercially unviable and has led to significant losses for the sector in April 2026. The big question now, will the government step in with relief measures, or will higher fuel costs start impacting fares, capacity and connectivity? My colleague Sumita Karir joins in with more details.
That's right. The Federation of Indian Airlines has written to the Ministry of Civil Aviation, apprising them of the kind of challenges that the aviation industry is facing, the domestic aviation industry. And in fact, the Federation of Indian Airlines comprises of companies like Air India. This also has SpiceJet along with IndiGo Airlines. And in fact, this federation has stated that the government needs to intervene urgently. It's requested for urgent intervention by the Indian government, given the fact the kind of stress that the aviation industry is facing is unprecedented. So essentially, that's been given in the letter that the Federation of Indian Airlines has mentioned in this letter, which has been written to the Civil Aviation Ministry. In fact, they are going as far as to say that if there is no urgent intervention, many routes are going to close as far as these airlines' operations are concerned. And operationally, these airlines are under severe burden on account of the West Asia war, the fallout of the West Asia war. Why is that so? Because ATF prices have risen considerably. And in fact, they say that ad hoc ATF pricing is putting a lot of burden on the cost of operations of these airlines. So, for instance, if you look at the letter essentially mentions that ATF prices for international routes, they have increased by 73 rupees per litre. And in fact, it also says that airline operations, the cost of ATF operations, it has moved from 30 to 40% to 55 to 60%. And that's creating completely non-operable conditions for Indian airlines. And of course, the Federation also mentions the fact that the rupee depreciation is not helping either, and that is also putting additional burden on the cost of these airlines. Now, if we look at the three key demands that have been mentioned in this letter by the Federation of Indian Airlines, it mentions and asks for temporary deferment of excise duty on ATF. It also asks for reduction of VAT in key areas along with reinstatement of track ban in line with pre-agreed formula.
Right, to discuss this and more, we are now joined in by Jitendra Bhargava, who's a former director at Air India. Mr. Bhargava, thank you so much for joining us on ET Now. Now, help us understand, the kind of crisis, that these airlines are going through currently, given, of course, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the entire West Asia crisis, and how, 40% of the cost of the airline is the aviation turbine fuel, in fact.
If you look at it, there is a convergence of various issues which are not conducive for economical operation of the airline industry. ATF is one factor, the prices have galloped, the availability is not assured, and then you have the airspace problem, and then you have, more importantly, the depreciation of Indian rupee. Let's not forget that most of the costs of airline industry are dollar designated. So how do you survive in this kind of environment? When the crisis started and we had first signs of ATF prices going up, airlines resorted to putting fuel surcharge, which meant passengers to pay higher fares for traveling between point A to point B. But when you have a sustained increase in the ATF prices, it becomes absolutely impossible for an airline to sustain operation. World over, top airlines have cancelled a large number of flights in the month of May. UK government has already taken proactive action, immunized the airlines that if you cancel your flights or club your flights, you will not stand to lose your slots. Because the rule is that if you don't operate 80% of your scheduled flights to a particular destination, you can run the risk of losing a slot for the next slot, for the next timetable. So this is where the government needs to be proactive, take action, take the airline very seriously that they are in a real crisis.
Right. And what kind of role can the government play? What could be these possible relief measures for, the airlines in India? Of course, the long haul routes have also become more expensive due to airspace closures. So how can government intervene, to address some of these woes that airlines have approached government with?
Let me explain to you. In normal circumstances, DGCA takes a certain stand, lays down condition for the airline that if you cancel flight, if you delay a flight, this is the kind of compensation you need to give to passengers. In current situation, because of the higher fares, the passenger loads are not very high. So if an airline resorts to clubbing of two flights, it may be 1 or 2 hours apart, they should voluntarily allow the airline to do so and not impose kind of financial burden on them. Then, of course, when many of the states in India, the sale tax is ad valorem on the pricing and raising is up to 25-30%. Now, what the government can do is, since the prices are going up of ATF prices, your sale tax income, so you can't be making money from a tragedy that the airlines are suffering because of higher ATF prices. On the other hand, the airlines are reaping a bonanza because at 25%, they're getting far more money at the enhanced ATF prices. So there is a lot of things that government can do, number one. And then, of course, is that if the crisis is coming, it's the airports suffer also. But when you have fewer landings and takeoff, the airports income go down. So there's a total kind of thing. So government must take a holistic view that since the economy as a whole suffers, the hotel industry, the taxis, the airports, the ATF airline industry, and all those things will suffer. The government should listen, heed the advice. After all, FIA does not go to the government for help every time. Airline industry is vulnerable to external pressure. We all know about it. Whether it's the economic recession, whether it's the war in any part of the world, it impacts the airline industry, and it is impacting. When it is on a sustained basis, the crisis becomes all the more difficult for an airline to be sustainable, operationally viable, and we don't want any airline in India to be shut down at this stage. As it is, the only kind of Air India and IndiGo monopolizing the domestic sector.
Right. And it's also critical time for travel, with the holiday, the vacation season on, families going on holidays, traveling abroad, traveling domestically. Domestic travel has also increased. So what kind of impact will it have on the consumers if the situation, where airlines are suffering continues going forward over the next few weeks?
Let me break your question in two segments. One are passengers who've already bought tickets for travel in the month of May, June, and on vacation. No problem, then airlines will honor it. Except that if they find the passenger load not to be very high, they should be allowed to club the two flights, as I said earlier. The second thing is, because the ATF prices are very volatile at the moment, the availability is also at risk. So what will an airline do? Can they start selling tickets for the month of June, July at this stage at the current fare that they foresee? The answer is no. They really do not know what kind of ATF prices will be prevailing, or they will have adequate supply of ATF available for them to sustain their scheduled operations. So that is why we are looking in a situation in the airline industry which is very uncertain, very volatile, dependent on numerous external factors, and that is where the challenge is before the airlines. So if the government cannot step in at this stage to assist it, it will not be good for the airline industry, because most of the airline industry's economics, as we all know, is very fragile. They make losses, barring IndiGo. Most airlines have been making huge losses. So if you want the airlines to sustain the operation, override the crisis that they are having on hand, the government must step in.
Also, I was reading somewhere that there is a massive disparity in the ATF, prices for international operations as compared to the domestic ones. Is it true, and why is there such a disparity, and how does it impact, competitiveness in the global market?
No, let me explain to you. Under the IATA regulations, the rules are that if a particular country is not charging sale tax on ATF, India also does not charge. On the domestic sector, the Indian rules prevail, and it depends on the various states whether they want to levy sale tax or not. As I said earlier, the state government must be persuaded to reduce the sale tax on ATF temporarily till the crisis there. On the international sector, since there is no sale tax, the difference between the ATF being purchased by Indian carriers also for international operations is much lower than what it is for domestic operations. And that's primarily because of the taxes levied on it.
Right. Help us understand, because this was a point which was raised by the airlines that certain routes will become completely unviable to fly to. Under the current situation, which are these routes, if you can help us identify, that would be difficult to fly to, will be unviable to fly to according to, some of these airlines, because there are no specific details given on those.
Okay, let me give it in detail. Airlines submit their flight schedule twice a year, summer schedule and winter schedule. So they've already submitted the summer schedule, which was operational from the last Sunday of March until the last Sunday of October. Now you have committed, the airlines have committed to operate a certain number of flights on certain destinations. Now you suddenly find you don't have adequate loads on certain sectors, besides the fact that government makes it kind of an order to the airline that you must operate X number of flights in these regions and all those things. But if you don't have passenger loads, don't insist on the airline. As I said earlier, government can be a facilitator in the current crisis. Let them not insist on the thing that you have to necessarily operate X number of flights to between Y and Z points. Now, if the airlines find that they really can't operate X number of flights that they've committed in the flight schedule to DGCA, let them allow the airlines to fix their timetable, keeping in view minimum passenger inconvenience, clubbing of flights to those destinations, giving adequate notice to passengers if they're canceling a flight, and airlines accommodating in a collaborative manner that if X airline has canceled a flight at a certain time, let the Y airline accommodate. It's a crisis that is being faced by the airline industry as a whole. So they must find a solution also where each one helps the other airline.
Mr. Bhargava, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us on ET Now today on India Tonight and helping us understand, how airlines have approached as an industry, has approached the government with SOS, given the crisis when it comes to currency fluctuations, when it comes to the West Asia crisis. Thanks again for joining us today on ET Now. Now, moving on, U.S. President Donald Trump says he is not satisfied with Iran's latest proposal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and bringing an end to the ongoing conflict. According to U.S. media reports, in Truth social media post, Trump claimed Iran has declared itself in a state of collapse and is seeking American assistance to restore shipping movement through the key oil transit choke point. He also suggested that Iran is undergoing an internal leadership transition while expressing confidence that the country could stabilize itself. The comments come as the U.S. Secretary of State defended targeted maritime actions against Iranian shipping, signaling Washington's tougher posture in the region. At the same time, Iran is reportedly moving closer to Russia diplomatically, even as several ASEAN nations and countries increasingly turn to Russia and Russian crude supplies amid rising regional energy pressures. Now, my colleague Sumita joins us with the details.
Absolutely. So now the commentary coming in from President Donald Trump on the situation in West Asia, particularly with respect to Iran. And it seems that the president once again is unhappy at the latest plans from Tehran. Reportedly, now Iran's most recent proposal reportedly is on resolving the 2-month war, essentially centers around the aspect that this would set aside discussions of its nuclear program until the conflict is concluded and disputes over shipping from the Gulf of Hormuz are resolved. And Trump wants nuclear issues to be dealt with the outset. And this is something that we've heard from the U.S. administration, from President Donald Trump, that they're not going to let Iran develop a nuclear weapon. And this is something that we very recently heard from Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Secretary for Defense as well. He said that there's not going to be any possibility of Iran developing a nuclear weapon. Now, Iran in its defense, has multiple times stated that they're not developing any nuclear weapon. And in fact, he then stated, Donald Trump stated, that Iran is in a state of collapse, is what the Iranian leadership has communicated to President Donald Trump. Now, it's important to also understand that it's not very clear from President Donald Trump's Truth Social post on how Iran might have communicated that message. And there's not been any commentary that's come in or any response that's coming from the side of the Iranians as well. So, of course, there are questions on the post's credibility. But remember, Gulf leaders have met in person in Saudi Arabia as well. So that's an important meeting that has happened. This is for the very first time since the war erupted. Of course, Gulf countries, they have become a front for the Iran war. And of course, a Gulf official is reported to have said in that meeting itself that the meeting was aimed to craft a response to thousands of Iranian missiles and drone attacks that they have faced ever since the war got launched. Of course, attacks have subsided, but Gulf capitals, they remain wary of this resumed conflict. So, of course, it'll be interesting to see what is the Iranian response to this. But remember, Iran's previous nuclear deal with the United States and other powers in 2015 that actually sharply curtailed its nuclear program, which it had long maintained for peaceful purposes, civilian purposes, and that is something that Iran has maintained. That stance Iran has maintained, but the deal, remember, that fell apart when Trump unilaterally withdrew that deal from the deal in his first time. And now what we are seeing is Brent crude prices once again rising.
Absolutely, Sumita. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, big breaking came in like some time ago, like a couple of hours ago, on the energy and the geopolitical front. The UAE had decided to exit both OPEC and OPEC Plus, with the move set to take effect from May 1st, according to a report by the state-run WAM news agency. Now, the UAE has also indicated that it will gradually boost oil production going ahead. This is a major development for global crude markets, given UAE's status as one of the key oil producers in the Gulf region. Markets will now closely watch the impact on the supply dynamics, pricing, and broader cohesion of the producer alliance. The announcement comes shortly after Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman chaired a consultative meeting of the Gulf Cooperation Council leaders in Jeddah. This was the first in-person gathering of the Gulf leaders since their countries were drawn into the Iran conflict 2 months ago. Now, my colleague Raghav is joining us with more details on this.
Well, absolutely, Shibani. We had a confirmation from the UAE Energy Minister on Twitter with respect to them stepping out of the OPEC and OPEC Plus alliance. With respect to that, currently Brent and crude prices are standing at a margin of 100 and 110 dollars per barrel. There will be an effect being seen with respect to the fall in these prices, because now UAE will be able to unlock its potential capacity that it was unable to. Speaking about the reasons why UAE is leaving, first of all, there were unfair production quotas as per them imposed, which did not allow them to use their spare capacity of about nearly 5 million barrels per dollar. There is also Saudi Arabia and Russia dominance in the OPEC and OPEC Plus alliance that UAE has already tried to counterbalance with the United States of America. There's also a wasted investment coming out with the news analysis that we have right now, that Abu Dhabi is spending about $25 billion per year expanding its capacity, but OPEC Plus has capped and prevented it from tapping into these revenue sources. There's also an energy shock that UAE wants to benefit from, which is to say that the revenue that is coming out of this is now divided into OPEC. But if UAE is able to have its own lines of supply with the United States of America, or for instance countries like India, then there is a larger revenue that it can tap into. At the moment, what we're able to analyze as a short-term gain for UAE, that this departure could unlock an upwards of $50 billion in additional yearly revenue for the UAE. It is to be seen what will happen in terms of a response from Saudi Arabia or other members of OPEC, if there's going to be a bandwagon effect after this.
Right, Raghav, thank you so much for those details. Now, moving on, U.S. markets are turning mixed in Tuesday trade, with S&P 500 slipping from record highs shares and Nasdaq under pressure as weakness in OpenAI-related sentiment is hitting chip stocks. The S&P 500 is down 0.4%, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq composite is losing 0.8% amid selling in semiconductor names. However, the Dow Jones is holding in a positive territory, up around 20 points, supported by sharp rally in Coca-Cola shares after the company reported stronger than expected earnings. Now, in a bid to improve transparency, Maharashtra FDA has mandated that all eateries in the state have to disclose whether they are using paneer or cheese analog. ET Now's Akanksha spoke to Maharashtra FDA Commissioner Sridhar Dubey Patil over this development. Listen in.
We have taken this issue regarding paneer and cheese analog because paneer is basically dairy product and cheese analog is non-dairy product. That means paneer is prepared from milk and cheese analog is prepared from other hydrogenated oils, palm oil, soybean, starch and some additives. To know this difference to the clients, when you are interested in any hotel, restaurant or food operator business, we are giving order of paneer. But what they are serving that doesn't know to so many peoples. To aware this to the people of Maharashtra, to all clients, those are eating in eateries, we have decided to differentiate these two basic difference items, food articles in hotel menu, as well as where they are producing these items. We have also pressed them to have the same in their sale bill. Okay.
Sir, so this directive covers restaurants, hotels, caterers and food vendors. But what about the online aggregators like Zomato and Swiggy? Because they don't have physical menus. They work with the digital menus. So how digital menus will be regulated?
Yeah, whatever they are, the online systems of food supplying, they have to follow the same rules that we have mentioned in hotel, eateries and food business operators. They have to mention in their menu also the two different food articles. Where they are supplying paneer, they have to mention in their menu card as paneer. Where they are supplying cheese analog, they have to supply as a cheese analog. If we find they are supplying paneer as a cheese analog, from which food body operators, our inspectors, our food safety officers will take strict action against them.
Okay. So having said that, the strict actions which you just said, so what exactly are going to be the strict actions against the businesses which does not follow the rules?
Actually, as per the Food Safety and Standard Authority of India, those who are providing fake means mimic foods, that means you are providing a cheese analog at the place of paneer. That is a misbranding also. And also deceiving to the clients. In such cases, if we take a samples and we find that the clients and all the normal public, general public in Maharashtra is cheated by these food body operators, we will take actions as per the rules of Food Safety and Standard Authority.
Well, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of India Tonight. Goodbye from me, Shabani Gharat, and the entire team of ET Now.